Welcome to Into the Heart, Finding Wisdom Within, the podcast dedicated to guiding you through life's transitions with grace, clarity, and heart-centered wisdom. Hi there, this is Amy D., your host, a transpersonal life coach, certified clinical hypnotherapist, Reiki master, and educator with over 20 years of experience teaching students of all ages in different modalities. This podcast is for you if you're navigating a change, a career shift, a relationship transformation, or even a deeper call within yourself that something in your life needs to evolve. Whether you're facing a big life shift or just sensing that it's time for something new, this is your space to find support, insight, and inspiration. I believe that life's transitions don't have to be overwhelming. In fact, they can be powerful gateways to growth, healing, and self-discovery. And you don't have to do this alone. Together, we'll explore how to tap into your inner wisdom, unlock your strengths, and create a mindset that empowers you to move forward with peace and confidence. Your journey is unique, and you're not alone. Every conversation, every story, every episode is designed to remind you that you have everything you need within you to thrive. And when we come together in community, we heal, grow, and rise in ways we never imagined possible. So whether you're in the middle of a transition or simply looking for inspiration to reconnect with your heart's wisdom, Into the Heart is here to guide you back to your center. Welcome back to Into the Heart, Finding Wisdom Within podcast. Today's guest is the amazing Cristine Hull, an integrative mental health expert with a master's degree in psychology and a doctorate in natural medicine. Her professional journey spans substance abuse treatment, school psychology, and private practice, where she helps clients discover mind-body solutions for lasting well-being. Cristine is the author of 10 Ways to Balance Your Brain Chemistry, a book that has helped thousands find holistic approaches to chronic mental and physical health challenges. She's also the creator of the Zero Point Meridian Technique, an evidence-based emotional release method designed to support rapid transformation and healing. Passionate about measurable outcomes and whole person wellness, Cristine advocates for a more accountable model of mental health that honors the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual dimensions of change. Love that. Today, we'll explore her personal journey, the science and spirituality behind her work, and some practical ways we can all cultivate greater balance and connection to our hearts. Cristine, Dr. Cristine, welcome to Into the Heart. I'm so delighted that you're here today.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. So I want to start with your story. Can you share some experiences or key moments in your life that have led you on this path towards natural medicine and to become an expert in this field and ultimately the work that you're doing today?
Yes, for sure. So I suffered from chronic mental health issues from childhood and on. And so my world, growing up it was a chronic depression, which I learned later is a different chemistry than, major depression. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't like there was really a solution out there for me. Even when my parents tried to treat it when I was an adolescent with antidepressants, it was I'd already kind of passed the point of no return as well by then, because I'd decided to reach out to the wrong solutions in order to try to change my brain chemistry, and substances weren't a great solution either. But I did get into recovery at a young age, really. At I think 19, 20-ish is when I was, I had a spiritual awakening that turned my life around. And from there, I went into substance abuse. I became a substance abuse counselor. And as I worked with people, I realized that they were also, like me, victims of chronic chemical imbalance, which led me to write my first book, 10 Ways to Balance Your Brain Chemistry, from the decades really, of working with addictions and, in my own journey in finding solutions that were holistic, because the antidepressants weren't a solution for me. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I deep dived, and I used some of that as I worked. I ended up kind of more in the prevention world And that's what inspired me to go into school of psychology and for my master's. And it was very refreshing to work with, children and teens who were, parents were ready to find a solution, but, it hadn't gone so far as, like my own world, like we were intervening sooner, which was, it was kind of a healing part of my own stories to see like, yes, we can turn this around sooner and see change. And so parents were very interested in holistic solutions. They didn't want to just put their kids on medication cocktails. Who wants to do that to a 10-year-old, right? And so yeah, it just opened up a lot as far as holistic approaches. And so when I started my private practice, I just kind of geared it towards integrative mental health and, and supported people in the whole picture of solutions.
And right there, I wanted to ask if you could, just for our listeners, could you clarify a little bit about what integrative mental health really, what it embodies or what it encompasses, and how does it differ from traditional approaches?
That is a great question. So I don't see as much out there. I run it, we run into integrative medicine some. So to first explain what is the medicine side of this. What's interesting to know is that in the beginning, the foundation of medicine, in Western medicine, there was more or less a classroom that is still today the classroom for studying medicine, and that is the cadaver. So cadavers are great for research and understanding the human body, and there were rules and policies and and laws that were created to protect the dead because of these classrooms, right? So it was a thing. And but what's missing in a cadaver? Life force, energy, right? And so on the Eastern medicine path, that's where we have things like traditional Chinese medicine, acupuncture that works with the meridians, and Ayurvedic, like Indian medicine that works with the chakra body. And, and there's people studying the, Kundalini, has even a direction there. Like there is a doctor who wrote a book, meditation as medicine, that takes Kundalini yoga and looks at this holistic approach to balancing hormones and, the endocrine system and different things. So that's the Eastern side. And the trick is, with integrative medicine is to bring them both together and and see that they work together. Yeah. So it hasn't been done as much in mental health. And so when you ask that, like we can talk about integrative medicine and what modalities look like. But in integrative mental health, there's not as many modalities or as much clarity around what that looks like. So the strongest one, I would say, in mental health is emotional freedom technique, which is the tapping tool that you're actually tapping on meridian points. Yes. And when I was trained in this back in 2003 when Gary Craig made it a thing, and I even used it in as a school psychologist. I have a fun story about that, but it's essentially where I started to develop that more and understand the meridian system and the power we have to influence emotion, which is energy in motion. Right.
Beautiful. Yeah. I have also used EFT during COVID. It was really helpful to cope with many different emotional experiences that were coming up at that time in my life. And there's a lot of ways to incorporate that into your daily practices, but it was definitely a technique that helped me for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll share the little story. Well, so I was working as a school psychologist in one of my first schools in 2005. So I just developed the tech, gone through the trainings and was using it myself. And I was in charge of a 12-year-old, a sixth grader, whose IEP specified that she needed the school psychologist or someone, to train special educators to help her get back to class when she was having an emotional meltdown. And so, the way that system works is, if a child's disability gets in the way of their accessing education, then we provide them with services or things that will help them access it. Well, she wasn't accessing education when she'd have a meltdown because she'd go home. So that was the typical scenario, is every week or two, or maybe sometimes multiple times a week, she would go limbic and they couldn't get her out of it and she'd go home. And so I brought her, you know, it happened while I was there. And so I brought her to my office and I could see, I mean, she was just like, she was over, you know, completely dysregulated. We didn't use that term back in 2005.
Yeah.
And so I just immediately like, well, just do this with me. And I started tapping and breathing and, you know, and slowing it down and trying to pinpoint the emotion. And within 15 minutes, she was like a different child. You know, it's like she had her mind back so she could function. And, you know, and she told me, she's like, oh my gosh, that was so cool. You know, and so she got back to class and it was record breaking because it had never happened before that.
Wow.
And the problem is that the education system wasn't prepared for a novel, you know, explored technique in it. You know, it wasn't evidence-based. And so it was experimental, I guess you could say, or outside the box. And that's what kind of showed me, like, I'm not gonna be able to stay here and do what I'm learning for very long. And I, you know, started the course towards my private practice. But I don't know, I think some things have shifted, hopefully, over the years, and things like that are more accepted or used, we hope, for when we need them.
Yes, I hope so too. I think there's a lot more information in general about, I want to say holistic sort of approaches to healing as opposed to medicine interventions. And there's a place for that too. However, I think, especially when it comes to young people, I know my son, when he was little, was diagnosed with ADD, and you know, one of the solutions was to try him on medication. Well, it didn't work for him. And we wound up having to go a different route. And back then, this was many years ago, back then it required hiring a special learning consultant to help him with some of the issues that he was experiencing in school so that he could begin to learn how to read the way that his brain processed information. So I feel that we were lucky that we were able to discover that, but there was a testing center here that helped us narrow down what was happening in his brain so that we could then find a solution that was an alternative to the medication, because it really just made him feel not himself. He didn't like the way he felt.
Yeah.
And he was 5 years old, so at the time. Yeah. So I'm excited to hear that, you know, these are things that can be incorporated into school settings if the schools are open and willing, you know, to these alternative type techniques.
Well, I set out to kind of create something that might pass the tests of, you know, evidence-based. And so over the years, I developed different aspects of EFT to where it actually was a different technique. When I started training practitioners in it, they said, oh, I was calling it the complete EFT method. And they're like, well, this is so different than EFT. Like, you need a different name. So it became the Zero Point Meridian.
Okay.
And ZPM. And it's, you know, the power of it is how completely it can neutralize strong emotions and also keep the heart open. And I know, like, we're going to talk more about that because this is all about, you know, let's keep that heart open into the heart. Go into the heart, not run from it. Don't block it, right? And so that's where the vital body is, that opportunity to get in and into those emotions in a way that you don't drown.
Yes.
And I think that's the fear, especially when I work with men, that they don't trust that emotional ocean. Like, I don't know if I'm going to have a raft, you know, am I ever going to come out? And a lot of us who have protected ourselves from the emotional world are not sure. And so this is so nice because it's kind of like a blueprint of processing. But the other fun thing is that I've compared it to EMDR. And so I had a practitioner who used a scale I developed that assesses kind of a wide range of, you know, where are you at physically, you know, because somatics are so important in
Of
our
course.
emotional regulation. And where are you at in your head, you know, where are you at in your heart?
Mm-hmm.
How connected do you feel? How spiritually connected do you feel? So it's looking at a wide range called the conscious intervention scale.
Mm-hmm.
And so we use this before and after a session, and it's really sensitive to change, which is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And so she did, you know, like 80 sessions with clients and just got a really good baseline using EMDR and brain spotting, which is next level EMDR.
Mm-hmm.
And it showed that clients were receiving, like they were benefiting in the realm of its standard deviation, which in, you know, psychometrics terms is significant
Sure.
in before and after sessions,
Mm-hmm.
which is great
Yeah.
or good at least, you know. And then I started using the same scales with the Zero Point Meridian Technique and the practitioners that were getting certified. And they were actually starting with people that were in a little worse shape than the clinical setting, which I thought was interesting. They weren't just doing it with their mom or their sister who was fine, you know, to practice
Sure.
on. They were people that really needed emotional support were coming to them to
Yeah.
get their, you know, their basic, you know, sessions in.
Mm-hmm.
And those scores were going up by 2 standard deviations.
Wow.
And it was so wild, and it's so consistent. We've retested it. It's the technique, not the practitioner. And I think that's what made EMDR get attention. And if you talk about integrative, it's almost integrative. You know,
Mm-hmm.
EMDR does work with some mechanisms that aren't just your typical cognitive behavioral or, you know, the talk therapy or something like that. It's actually accessing, you know, deeper with the body, maybe, or the mind through the eyes. That anyway, I don't really know the mechanics. They say, you know, even I did get certified in EMDR and they never could explain it. So something's happening they can't explain, which
Right.
does sound a little alternative, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. Well, does it probably, I'm not trained in EMDR, but I am trained as a clinical hypnotherapist, and I would suspect that there are some similarities there as well in the fact that do you access, through a somatic bridge, do you access the subconscious mind in EMDR at all?
a little bit. You do work with symbolism.
Okay.
And there's a little bit of hypnotherapy, you know, like we take people to a place
Okay.
that is very
Yeah.
sensorial, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like a lot of information there.
Okay.
So relaxation's involved. Yeah. So there's a little, at least, elements of hypnotherapy in it.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when I'm working with a client, I'll use my intuition. You know, that's what I started to really lean on.
Sure.
In an integrative approach. And so back to this, what is an integrative approach? It involves intuition. It involves even a spiritual connection. And there's times when I was using the eye movement that I would feel inspired to do a different type of eye movement.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you understand neurolinguistic programming,
Mm-hmm.
there's different eye accessing cues, and, you know, we reach different parts of our psyche, I guess, even within that. And so there's something, you know, kind of more integrative, I guess, about that.
For sure. You use such a wide variety of different techniques too. You have an extensive experience using and integrating all of these different modalities to create your very own form of healing. And I know that you know, people are often looking for specific solutions to specific problems. When it comes to mental health, though, how do you know what kind of approach might address something that a specific individual is going through as opposed to another? Or is this a comprehensive approach that you use in this technique?
Well, let me share my frequency assessment.
Okay.
So I actually have a tool that answers that question quite well. So I started studying Dr. Hawkins' emotional map, basically the map of consciousness.
Okay.
So it, you know, it calibrates different emotions. And so when we're working with emotions, it really helps to know, like, is this anger or what's under that, you know, and to know this map more or less. And so in doing that, I also understood, like, you know, there's this really like a journey of awakening. So that's raising your frequency. And then I started to break it down more, because it's like there's not just one calibration to explain someone's life experience.
Right.
So what I started doing is breaking it down into 5 different areas. And so there's the mental emotional, which we're talking about, but also physical health, which also creates kind of that integrative approach, because if somebody's struggling, how often does a mental health clinician really ask about, well, have you had your thyroid checked, or are you, going through perimenopause, or is there, something in your DNA that would explain this, right? And so I also do like a DNA assessment. I take the raw data and run it through like a naturopathic, system to say, here's all this stuff that might be helpful supplement wise, right?
Yeah.
And then the third area we're looking at is relationships.
Okay.
And so if someone comes in whose relationships are just like, that's their secret, is like there's some emotional abuse, or they haven't forgiven their mother, or that will be a heavy burden, so that will lower their frequency, that matters too. Career and finances, so that's another important area. But then spirituality, and I think spirituality is the one that, in my training we were kind of supposed to stay away from that discussion unless the client brings it up, kind of thing. But I think it's a critical component in the journey of healing. So I break that down, and we actually get scores in those areas, and that really helps direct a client's path.
For sure. Well, and then and everybody has a unique set of circumstances, experience, and therefore it would seem natural that also the healing path would be unique to each individual. Finding out about brain chemistry, I'm really fascinated by this topic of brain chemistry and how you have you've written a book on it, and also you have managed to navigate putting together all these different systems and put into place a framework that can help guide you. And also, I believe that you train other practitioners as well in being able to practice this. Can you talk a little bit about what are some of the most impactful ways in which people can support their brain chemistry in a natural way?
Oh, yes, there's a lot to that. So I think it's helpful to talk about the 5 brain chemicals.
Okay.
So it helps to know, and in the book there's a little self-assessment, so you can look at which chemicals are out of balance.
Okay.
And so typically people are familiar with norepinephrine. So that's also called noradrenaline. It's your stimulant in your brain that's natural, but we have these pseudo, like our counterfeits, which I actually call them, like caffeine. Okay. And so we have like really got a caffeine-based society, don't we? It's just kind of like a staple now, the coffee and energy drinks and that type of thing. What goes up comes down. And so that's important to look at in someone's brain chemistry, and adrenals are part of that. So I have a lot I do with looking at, are your adrenals in balance? Because if you're throwing them into fight, flight, or you're maxing, you're like pumping out all the noradrenaline to get through your day, and you come down, you're exhausted. They call it adrenal fatigue. So that's important to look at. But naturally, people also have something called GABA, and gamma amino butyric acid is a natural depressant. And so we want that to be present during sleep, or, as we're falling asleep. We want it's pretty strong, hopefully, during deep sleep cycles. And it will like lower the heart rate and cause the system to really relax. It's also nice doing hypnotherapy to have, you'll have a little release of GABA, and that's naturally where we want to be when we're resting. So some people don't have enough GABA produced, and they have kind of chronic anxiety, or they don't ever really calm all the way. And so that's going to affect your nervous system. So you're going to have a lot of, nervous system, over heightened responses, or chronic anxiety, that type of thing. And so it's important to be aware of that.
Okay.
Also, we have the all-arounder, they call it the upstairs, downers, all-arounders, and, in substance abuse, but Oh, but the downer in counterfeits is alcohol. So that think about how often someone has the glass of wine at night and then their coffee in the morning. So basically they're creating artificial support for
Mhm.
that system that is meant to have a natural, balance. But
Sure.
the all-arounder marijuana is a lot more popular now. We're
Right.
seeing people get a lot of medical cards, even our really conservative town, like we've got the Green Cross out there, and
Right.
and it's just kind of more commonplace. And but the similar chemistry of that is serotonin. That's your serotonin levels, and antidepressants have been the thing that medically are prescribed for that. So
Mhm.
when I mentioned depression, that's not the thing that everyone with depression needs. It depends on the type of depression.
Mhm.
So let's go to endorphins.
Okay.
So I'll tell a story real quick of when I was working in the schools. I was, over they call it an emotional behavioral disorders unit. So
Mhm.
these were students who weren't stable enough to be in a regular classroom. Some of them had come out of, psychiatric hospitals or were dangerous,
Mhm.
and they were still, like, being provided an education just in a very controlled environment. And one of the students was just very disruptive and incredibly negative. In a regular classroom, he made people cry.
Mhm.
So they put him in here,
Mhm.
and just a very unhappy, miserable child. And, it made it miserable for everybody. So, anyways, in there one day, and I noticed he was happy and he was doing his work at his table, and he was coming up with, and talking nicely to the teacher. And I was like, what happened? And she's like, I don't know. I hope it never goes away,
Oh.
but it's a miracle, Like, well, let's trace it back. Cause my job is
Mhm.
behavioral, assessment. And so she traced it back to him having dental work done. And it was a unit where they could administer the medication, could dispense them. And so she had the medication in her drawer and she showed me, and it was a narcotic.
Oh.
So what had happened is he had just treated dysthymic depression.
Hmm.
And that is when I was like, that's a hit for me, and knowing like this is a different chemistry.
Mhm.
And that was what I grew up with. So I was, as I grew up, I remember there was a guy who came to our school that said, he was a recovering addict. And I remember him saying, just don't use heroin.
Mhm.
And me hearing that, and that was the drug I didn't use. And thank goodness, because I was prime for that addiction,
Mhm.
having that chronic depression and a chemical imbalance, which I would say would be endorphin based. So I'm going to ask you if you know, on the continuum, okay, heroin's clear at this end, but narcotics, you got pain pills in there. What's all the way at the end? Like we talked about coffee and alcohol. Do you know what might be clear over here? Sugar.
Oh, wow.
So
Of course,
sugar is on
sugar.
the continuum of narcotics,
Yeah.
and look at this sugar generation, right? And so we also have primed a potential narcotic abuse
Sure.
with this. And, and so and that's an important thing to recognize is if you're just chronically low and you're seeking that fix from sugar, carbs is the one for the serotonin people, but
Okay.
sugar's the one for the,
Mhm.
more the endorphin deficient. So and then the fifth one is dopamine. And dopamine is the one that you see the addicts, which ones are dopamine, contingent, because they have typically a low dopamine. My husband's one,
Okay.
and he was the one that got into meth, and gambling and a lot of things that, he likes really intense music. And so that's your dopamine world. It's like it's high intensity, um, takes you to that level that's not, you can't really do real life in it,
Mhm.
can't maintain it.
Sure.
And so, but it's the thrill seekers, the risk takers,
Okay.
typically.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was really helpful to understand all of those different facets of brain chemistry, and how they impact or how they play out in someone's
Yeah.
life.
And now, like just day to day habits and
Yeah.
patterns that we don't even realize because everybody does it. Well, I think I would dare guess more than half the population has at least one, if not more than one, chemical deficiency.
Sure.
And you can actually see it in your DNA. It's their mutations that show up.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It makes me think of, you know, I'm thinking of addiction in general, but addictions can be to certain chemical things,
Hmm.
right, that help us maybe feel better or less, whatever. But then there's also process addictions as well. They're ways that we develop thinking and habitual ways of behaving and patterns of believing things, and we go to those on repeat.
Mm.
So the that type of addictive personality, if you will, can manifest, I think, in many different ways. Maybe it's not a substance addiction, but it can also lead to a different pattern of addiction. Our bodies are so wise, and our brains form all these neural pathways, right? For we seek what's familiar sometimes, to
Yeah.
continuously source a sense of maybe balance or equilibrium, or maybe it's numbing something that we don't want to experience. I know that one of your pieces of your work is nutritional neurochemistry. So, can you share a little bit more about that? Like, how does it influence the body? I know, for example, we talked about this when we first met about HRT, for example, hormone replacement therapy. For those of us who are going through different transitions physically with our hormones, right? But how does that play out? How does it influence the body?
Well, yeah, that's so complex. And that, with my doctorate in natural medicine, it was like you have to kind of specialize almost, right? Just like any
Yeah.
kind of medical degree. And so my specialty, I'll share in a second, but first of all, let me tell you where it got really vast and
Okay.
overwhelming, I would say, is in studying nutritional neurochemistry, there's a whole herbology realm. That
Okay.
is not where I specialized. I do say that I look quite deeply at amino acid therapy.
Okay.
And, I had an entire coursework just around amino acid therapy. So there are actual some amino acids that will support brain chemistry very specifically that people don't even realize are available, like 5-HTP. So it's 5-hydroxytryptophan. So L-tryptophan is a precursor for serotonin.
Mm.
And in the metabolite, like on the journey from amino acid to serotonin, there's a metabolite called 5-HTP. So that's something you can actually, I think you can get it at Walmart,
Okay.
and you can take it as a supplement, and it supports that lack of production,
Mm-hmm.
because actually taking an antidepressant doesn't give you more building blocks. It changes the way that the brain is recycling serotonin, but it doesn't really give you building blocks to make your own. So
Yeah.
I do like amino acids for that reason. They're giving you the building blocks for your own.
Sure.
There's a DL-phenylalanine is very interesting for people that are missing that dopamine or the endorphins to some extent, because it will give you a little boost without it being too, up and down, right? So it gives
Okay.
you that building block as well.
Sure.
And then GABA is my favorite. I have GABA on my shelf. So you can
Okay.
actually take GABA as a supplement, and you
Okay.
can find it, I have some of my my favorites, but it's available. So,
Okay.
and it's very safe. Like you can take some GABA. I would take it, to manage anxiety, and it doesn't knock you out. So you can
Okay.
still like drive or whatever. You can kind of
Mhm.
work with it like you would
Sure.
just your mood.
Mhm.
So yeah. So that's one area but then that opens up a whole nother door, because then you've got minerals that help support that. One of my favorite minerals it's actually one that Standard Process produces. And so Standard Process is a unique company because they work with whole foods. So they
Okay.
take a whole intact like ingredients
Mhm.
to bring you more of what it is you need. And I like that model. So
Okay.
Mintran is one of my favorites. I talk about it in the book,
Okay.
and it's the main minerals that allow all these amino acids to get where they need to go and do what they need to do.
Gotcha.
But then that leads us to, what if your whole system is compromised by a mutation? And if your audience hasn't heard of MTHFR, that's one to know about. So it's methyl tetrahydro something, folate reductase. So what the folate reductase is that someone who has that mutation is not metabolizing folate.
Okay.
And if you don't do that, you're going to struggle with every brain chemical. So when I do an assessment on someone and they're low in GABA and they're low in, they're using, like, this is your lifestyle. You're using the coffee to wake up, the wine to go to sleep, you're considering a medical card, and you've also already got antidepressants going on. And then, it's just, like maybe there's still some chronic depression. Okay, so it's all there.
Sure.
I'm guessing that they are a candidate for this. It's a methylated folate is all it is. And that was my life changer. That was me.
Okay.
So that was my story growing up. Like, all those things were off. And it wasn't until my 40s that I figured out, because it wasn't really known, I think, until.
How did you know what to look for?
What'd you say?
How did you know what to look for?
Okay, well, that leads to my specialty. So my specialty is actually none of those. I said all those. I still use supplements. I am a fan of a lot of good things out there. But you could be on a goose chase for so long, trying to get the right mix of things, and especially with hormone replacement therapy. So here's my specialty. I actually, in my studies with Quantum University, it reinforced this is a real thing, and it is in quantum medicine.
Okay. So
when we talk about the body, we have these layers. We talked about physical body.
Yes.
We want to know that there's more to it than that. So we have a vital body. It's not just a cadaver. We have this infusion of energy, right? We also have a mental body. And that was what I studied in psychology, and understanding how the mind affects your well-being. And you can think yourself into an anxiety attack. You can think yourself into, a good place too.
Yes, our minds are very powerful.
Mind is powerful.
Yes.
And it's interesting to look at that, is that something as subtle as the mind, that you can't really even see the thoughts, could have that kind of impact on the body. Like, you can see change, like you can put a blood pressure monitor on someone and see them get into a state that raises their blood pressure or lowers it, right?
Yeah.
So with that, there's a fourth body. And that fourth body is the information body that actually informs the others. And it's the one that we don't even know to think about. It is faith-based. It is a spiritual kind of interface. And so with that, there's actually information-based formulas. And so I have a formula line called frequency formulas. And that is what I was taking when I discovered I had the MTHFR gene. And so I was taking one that actually supports balance in serotonin levels and good, the feel good ones. And still struggling, even in my it was like a chronic thing, and I tried so much, and went to a naturopath, and he identified it, and it changed your whole
life,
future.
Yeah.
From there.
That's extraordinary. Yeah. I always say, I think in life, we have all these breadcrumbs that are laid out for us to follow, right? To find our path, find our way. And in your case, and also in mine, I have this parallel experience with you in that my own healing is what has led me to my passion, to my service, where I feel like what I do, even through this podcast, is a service, to bring guests like you on who are experts in your field. And also to make the connection with the healing modalities that you have learned and it sounds like also tried many different different levels and ways to facilitate your healing. And without that, probably wouldn't have arrived where you have. It's all part of the process, the weaving of the different modalities. And finding what works for you. And I love that you mentioned early on intuition, because I think if we really do follow our intuition and listen to our bodies, which are extraordinarily wise, and use our mind to help us to tap into the wisdom of the body. And
I'm glad you mentioned that, because with the formulas I have affirmation cards
okay.
that are designed to give that, like, acceleration of the solution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then that helps you to, as you were saying earlier too, to raise your frequency, to really to align to something, a dimension, which for me is a spiritual dimension. Some people may think of it as a quantum field. It can be called many different things, but a higher self, this notion of something that's greater than just the physical body. I mean, you were just describing all these different layers, and I think that when we along the path at some point, at least for me, I know this is true, and I think I hear this in your story as well, is there comes a time where there's some coherence, there's some kind of understanding that our bodies, mind, and spirit are one. And through this coherence, it allows us to really deepen our knowledge of who we are. I would like to ask you about this, because I'm super interested in heart coherence. I know that we had a conversation about this also, and how through different practices we can access and support our own healing. Can you explain or share a little bit about that in your journey?
Yes. So I did discover Heart Math Institute and got a heart, coherence monitor, so it's something that is it HRV, something like that. Anyway, heart rate variability is part of that in measurement. And so I started using it with my clients, and it was really interesting to see how, and myself, it has ratings, or it'll code your heart rate coherence in a red, yellow, or green, I believe it is. And that red is like, oh, not good, not good. And yellow is, you could be better. And green is like, yes, you're on. You're like, whatever you're doing, do more of that.
Okay.
So what it's finding is, when the mind and the heart come into coherence, it looks different than, like apathy, for example. Apathy is like, well, I've just checked out. So my heart is just like, close the door. It allows for, like, the idea is you're feeling your feelings, but you're not running away with them in your head. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what there's an actual measurement to say, like, you're in a balanced state. And I find that when people will use something like Zero Point Meridian, they can get into more heart rate coherence. I find it with even essential oils. I've got a chapter in the book on, we can really access our sensory, vehicle of, mindfulness. Mm-hmm. And get to heart rate coherence that way, and meditation for sure. And so, when someone is meditating and in that open-hearted, softer mind, that's when you get the green. And so it's fun to play around with and just see where, especially for an individual, like where their best practices are for that.
Sure. Yeah. I can't believe it, but we're coming to the end of our conversation already. This has been so informative, and I really appreciate your candid sharing and your own vulnerable story as well, because I'm sure that there are listeners out there wondering how and where can they turn. Maybe they haven't found solutions to what they're going through. Do you have some tips for our listeners that where could they find help? How can they get a hold of you? What would you recommend?
So I've got some free stuff, which is nice. And, I'm reworking my website, so hopefully it'll be ready. But 10waysbook.com there's some great, it's like a whole series that people will get with video explaining the brain chemistry, and it goes really well along with the book, but it's really good stuff either way. So that, 10waysbook.com. And then I also have released 4 Bodies, 4 Medicines as a free ebook. It is also part of the if you buy the book, you get it as part of 10 Ways, which is great. But 10 Ways is on Audible. And so I think just immersing in the solution and understanding yourselves better is a huge, part of that. But CristineHull.com is where you can find some, a mix of resources. And Cristine is without an H, CristineHull.com. And then I think just finding that balance and realizing that, yes, if we're leaning too much on a side of our, well-being, it's important to balance that out, reach for the spiritual solutions, look at your physical well-being and, and notice where your head is.
Yeah.
So yeah, the emotions and the mind work together really well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So true. Cristine, before we wrap up, what would be a message that you would like to leave with our listeners to remember when it comes to cultivating mental wellness, emotional balance, and a heart-centered life?
Sorry, what was
I'll repeat. Yeah. So what would be a message that you would like our listeners to hear who are seeking to cultivate mental wellness, emotional balance, and lead a heart-centered life?
I think an affirmation is powerful. And so I use the one, it kind of represents my business. So health, healing, and wholeness. And, I am healthy, healed, and whole. I think is really powerful. And so it's basically stating that truth. And then the trick is to feel it, right? So say the words, but then feel, what does that feel like to be healthy, healed, and whole? And visualize.
Yes.
What does that look like to be healthy, healed, and whole? I even did a vision board once that showed like, this is what it looks like. I had my, pictures and images so that it settles into that subconscious.
Yeah.
Maybe a little hypnotherapy wouldn't hurt.
Yes.
Yes.
Hypnotherapy is a wonderful tool as well.
And plug that affirmation in.
Yes. Beautiful. Cristine, this has been an awesome conversation. Thank you so much for your time, your expertise, and your open heart.
Thank you.
If this conversation speaks to your heart, please subscribe to Into the Heart Finding Wisdom Within on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, iHeartRadio. You can follow me, Amy D., your host, on Instagram at Pathways to Purpose Life Coach. If you would like to learn more about my one-on-one coaching and packages, you can find information on my website at pathways-to-purpose-coaching.com. There you will also find a special gift waiting for you. There's a beautiful heart meditation and an interactive guide to awaken your inner power. If you're considering asking for support on taking your next step during a life transition, I want to invite you to set up a free discovery call with me. I would love to support you during your life's transformational journey. Until next time, take care of your beautiful heart.